Story 1. I was recently flying across the country from Maryland to Seattle. The flight was scheduled to depart at 7 a.m. I arrived at the airport around 5 a.m., expecting to check in my bag, clear security, and grab some breakfast before boarding. That plan, however, did not go as expected. When I arrived, the airline had a line of about 15 to 20 people waiting to check their bags, but I figured I would still be fine. What I didn't anticipate was the family at the front of the line that was checking in a staggering 16 bags. The airline I was flying with only operates 4 flights a day from this particular airport, which meant they only had 2 staff members working the check-in counter. The family with 16 bags consisted of the mother, father, a baby, and 3 children who looked to be between 4 and 9 years old. They hadn't checked in yet, nor had they prepaid for or tagged any of their bags. On top of that, they were having issues with their credit card, and the counter agent had to help them find 5 seats together on a fully booked flight. Altogether, they spent over an hour with one of the 2 agents. I spent more than 50 minutes waiting to check my bag with the other agent. During that time, the mother of the family walked away from the counter in tears, claiming that her children were embarrassing her. Trust me, it wasn't the children that everyone in line was upset with. By the time I had finally checked my bag, the line behind me had grown to roughly 50 people, and the flight had to be held to give everyone enough time to check their bags and clear security, given the delay. To make matters even more complicated, there were not 5 seats available together on the plane. So, they seated the mother with 1 child in a row, the second child in the middle seat of the row across from her, the third child in the middle seat behind her, and the father in the middle seat behind that. Throughout most of the flight, they ignored their children, except to occasionally yell at them, and expected the passengers in those rows to keep an eye on the kids. And here's the final kicker: they didn't even need to be on that flight. They were actually headed to Texas to retrieve the wife's car and personal belongings, but it was cheaper for them to rent a car on the West Coast. Since the father was in the military, he charged the flights and the 16 bags to the government and held up an entire flight that they didn't really need to be on, all to save a few $100s on a rental car. Story 2. Mainly due to their attitude towards our use of our own property. We're semi-detached, and it's the neighbors adjacent to us that are not attached but share a driveway, and there's no divide between ours or their garden except for the back. We moved in about 4 years ago, just me and my partner and our precious big dog. Everything was pretty mundane, neighbors weren't really much bothered. But then again, we didn't really do much as we'd just moved, and we were still settling in. However, for whatever reason the past year, the neighbors have become increasingly obnoxious and inconsiderate. They have a daughter who regularly visits and constantly parks outside our house despite plenty of other spaces available, as there are no houses in front of us, and there's even a lady area a few meters down the road, literally 10 seconds away. We've asked her to move several times now as we have cameras watching over the cars, and if she parks there we have to park further down the street, leaving the cars unguarded overnight, unless we wait until she leaves and go move them back, which is usually 11 p.m. or later, long after we head to bed for work. It's in front of a dropped curb she parks, and we know we can get the council involved, but would rather not resort to that. Annoying as that is, it's not the worst, not even close. A while back we had asbestos sheets removed from our garage, as it had cracked under the weight of the neighbor's tree. We said nothing about it because we wanted rid of it regardless, for obvious reasons. When the work started, the neighbor said, "Oh, feel free to get rid of any bushes or trees in your way." However, when the neighbors realized it was asbestos on account of the PPE, they went crazy and said we should have quarantined the street and organized an action plan. And because we didn't, we should have gone in and basically landscaped their backyard, as they now viewed it as contaminated. They said this while standing next to the sheets, without PPE on. Yes, they thought it was very dangerous indeed. The roof sheets were intact apart from the one his tree broke, and any expert or even Google search will tell you it's safe so long as it's intact and not broken up. Conveniently, a few months after they had people getting rid of trees, bushes, etc., who also did not have PPE on, so if they thought it was dangerous they would have said, or more likely didn't care to inform the workers. Hindsight, they obviously just wanted us to pay to get their back done. Moving on, the summer came, and they let their kid run about the front garden and sides of the house along both our shared driveways. They literally left him out and let him do whatever he wanted for hours. So his idea of fun was to collect stones from the garden and dump them all over both sides of mine and the neighbor's property, as well as leaving toys everywhere. He then began inviting the kids from the street to play in theirs and our garden, and the noise was getting unbearable. Every day, like a nursery, it was unbearable. The noise constantly irritated my dog and made her anxious. My partner, who is a nurse and does night shifts, didn't sleep properly for a week, just infuriated me to the point that I had it, and said it. I'm building a fence between us and them. To stop the kids from playing on our side, and to get a bit of privacy and distance from the neighbors. Me, being a friendly neighbor, gave them a heads up, and said I'd make sure I kept to our boundary, and even a few cm in to be sure. Neighbors seemed delighted and said it would solve the stone problem. Failed to apologize for it, however. Then said it would add value to both our properties. I sort went yay whatever, not really caring what he thought. Literally just wanting some sort of barrier between us and them. Anyways, my brother-in-law comes and installs the fence the whole way along our property, and it looked great. However, the neighbors were livid because the smooth side faced us and not them. Reason being, if they wanted to use our fence post and do their own, they could, and we wouldn't have the smooth side facing another fence. Anyway, the neighbor went mental that the nice side faced us and said that it wasn't finished, and I said yes it is. Also, if you want to use the fence post to do your own, I didn't mind if you built on our fence. He then said, I thought you were going to do both of ours. He thought I was going to pay double for the materials/work so he could have a fence. Then, realizing what he meant by adding value to both our properties, I started laughing and said, no, if you want to build yours, go ahead. I said I might paint it and it would look better, and he said, well, you have to do both sides. Like literally dictating what I do on my own property. A few other things not quite as major, but annoying. They use our bins without asking, they power wash their back and got dirt all sprayed over our shed, and just left it. They helped themselves to using our skip. When we had it without asking, they wanted me to knock down the middle wall between our front gates so they could fit an electric car plus charger in. Impossible now with the fence. For the first 2 years of us living there, they had a broken down car in the middle of our driveway and never mentioned when it'd be removed or even if it was okay. Anyway, has anyone else dealt with people like this before? I'm so close to screaming at them to F off and mind their business, but I'm trying to be civil. We just want to come home after work and relax. I work as a scientist and my job is really stressful and requires long hours. My partner is the same. We're tempted to hire voodoo priest or something just to get rid of them at this point. Jokes, not really. Story 3. A bit of necessary background. This happened in 2003. I worked in the insurance industry in a lesser-known profession involving audits. I got my start working for a small company created by my uncle, and I was with him for about 10 years. My uncle then decided it was time for him to build his dream home and move, which meant I either had to take over the company or find a new job. I didn't want to spend half my day chasing down invoices, so I elected to start a job search, and he agreed to give me some time to find a position before he shut things down. There are 2 types of positions in my field. You either work for an independent service provider or directly for an insurance company. Openings at insurance companies don't come around often, and independent service providers don't have the greatest reputations. They're basically employers of last resort. That ends the background, and now to my story. Over the course of about 3 weeks, I applied for 2 positions at different insurance companies. I was quickly notified that I didn't get one of the jobs, but the second company kept saying, "We'll get back to you." Not wanting to hold my uncle up, I bit the bullet and applied at the largest independent service provider in the country. The day of my interview, I met with the on-site manager, a lovely lady who seemed to be a bit in over her head. It just so happened that her boss, the district manager, and his boss, the regional manager, were also in the office that day and sat in on the interview. It went well. I filled out paperwork, We shook hands, and I left. I didn't hear anything from them for about a week. During that week, I finally got a call back from the other insurance company, which happened to be the largest in the world at the time, known by 3 initials. They offered me a position, went over the details, set a start date, and I accepted. The following Monday, my phone rang at about 10 am. I answered, and it was the lady I had interviewed with at the independent service provider, who I'll now refer to as Vendor Lady or VL. VL. Hi, we were expecting you this morning. Is there a problem? Me. Pardon. VL. Today was supposed to be your first day, and we thought you would be here at 9 o'clock. Me. Why would you think that? VL. That's what our records show. Me with absolutely no irony whatsoever. I don't work for you, ma'am. I never heard from you guys after the interview. No one called to offer me a position or discuss salary, much less a start date. VL stammering a bit. Oh, I had no idea. I'll take care of it, and sorry about that. Me. Thanks, and have a good day, I guess. But that's not the end of the story. The following Wednesday, which was typically payday for the job I had at the time, I checked my bank account and saw that there was an automatic deposit from the independent service provider. I stared at my screen for probably a good 5 minutes, trying to puzzle out what in the world was going on. Then I realized I would have to call VL again. Me. Hi VL, you might remember me from the mix-up where you thought I was supposed to work for you, but I don't. Why did I receive a paycheck from your company? VL, that doesn't sound right. Let me check. She placed me on hold for a few minutes, then came back and said, well, it looks like since you filled out all of the required paperwork during the interview, you were accidentally placed on payroll. What you can do, though, is just write us a check for the payroll amount, and that should take care of it. Me struggling to comprehend how truly absurd this situation was. Listen, VL, I review payroll records for a living, so I'm very aware that you can simply have your payroll department reverse the paycheck. That will zero out any payroll taxes you paid, as well as any that were withheld from the paycheck, and reclaim the small amount deposited into my bank account. So no, I will not be writing you a check and paying you for not working for you. The week after that, I started my new job at the large insurance company. Ironically, within 6 months, both the district manager and regional manager from the independent service provider joined the company, one as a coworker in my department and the other in a related department. I have no idea what happened to VL, but good luck to anyone working under her. Edit. Thanks for all the support. I'll try to answer some of the most common questions. No, it wasn't a scam. That independent service provider is still around today, still the employer of last resort, and unfortunately, still the largest independent service supplier in my industry. I filled out all the paperwork for direct deposit because I was told it would streamline the hiring process. I definitely did not supply them with a voided check. They did reverse the deposit, and I never heard from VL again, though I would get periodic emails over the next few years asking if I was interested in working for them. Lastly, the large insurance company I ended up working for was indeed run by Hank Greenberg. I left them after 2 years for a better position, about a year and a half before the big financial crash. Story 4. For a bit of context, I was born with only 7 months in the womb, instead of 9. That said, it appears the right side of my body didn't form in a fully correct way. It's not that I'm deformed and don't even look human. I just have some weird characteristics in my right side of the body, like a small birthmark. One of my fingers in the right hand always looks jammed, and the most noticeable, my right eye is a bit smaller than the other and has a tiny deformity in the cornea. That being said, my right eye sometimes goes a bit to the right when I get too concentrated or too distracted, and I cannot control it. It just happens randomly and stops randomly, and I've been told that when I'm on moving vehicles, my eye seems to move alongside it, like when it jumps or trembles, my eye does too. But I've talked about this to many medics and doctors, and they've all told me the same. No surgery can fix it, and an eye patch would only get my eyesight worse. I have glasses BTW, like I cannot see, and by that I mean that I sometimes cannot read big letters on the other side of the road. So, having said that, let's move to the story. Here where I live, when you reach middle high school, it's the same here, secondary school. It's just basic and advanced orientated. You no longer have PE classes at school, but on a club, paid by the school. So, to move there, I used the bus. The ride there that day was quite peaceful, just one whining baby. But that's not a big deal. But oh, the ride home, that was not. After 15 minutes waiting in the sun, the bus finally arrived, and I hopped in, paid for my ride and sat down. Just a few stops later, enter the entitled mother and kid of this story. So, I was sitting at almost the back of the bus, and this lady who looked like she was around her late 40s, and this kid who looked to be in his 12 or 13 years walked to the back. The entitled mother made a loud ahem noise, but I was not moving. There literally were seats next to her. It's just that they were the one-passenger seats on the right side of the bus. Naturally, none of us moved. She just huffed and sat down. The kid with her didn't sit down and just went standing, until the woman that was sitting next to me left. So he asked if he could sit there, and I moved to let him pass. Now, this gave him a good look of my right eye, since he was next to it. At first he didn't seem to notice, but then, oh gosh, he just stares at me for a full 10 minutes, with a, "this is so wrong" kind of face, then moves from the seat and up to his mom. He didn't even whisper. Entitled kid. "Mom, did you see that girl's eye? It's weird. Is she disabled or something?" I pretended not to hear since I didn't want any trouble, but then this woman walked up to me. Entitled mother, "Excuse me, may I see your eye for a moment?" I was sure of what she was doing, but my stupid self decided to look at her anyway, and there she saw my eye. Oh gosh, disgusting. Would you mind not doing that so close to my baby? Doing what now? Moving your eye like that, it's rude, stop it. No, I can't, I would if I could. Now, this isn't a lie, I would stop it if I could control it. You brat, stop lying. You kids these days are so uneducated. Now, the lady's yelling actually made the driver move to a stop and, well, stop and walk up to us. Driver, what seems to be the problem here? This brat is scaring my baby. Just look at her moving her eye like that. You should remove her from this bus. Now, I didn't fully hear the entire conversation since the driver made her walk away from me to talk. But after almost 15 minutes of her yelling, kicking, screaming and pointing in my direction, she just grabbed her kid's hand and stormed out of the bus, cursing at the driver for kicking her off the bus. The driver just continued without a word. Story 5. When I was 9, my dad tricked me into moving from my mother's home to live with him. I went over to visit him, and it was always super fun. At the time my mom was with an abusive man and life was hard, so living with my dad seemed to be the perfect opportunity. Eventually my dad ended up getting custody of me, and I moved away from my mom and my little sister. The first few days were great, but it didn't last long. First it started with chores. Not just one, all of them. Laundry, dishes, washing and sweeping floors, etc. It went like this for about a month, and I was okay with it. But it got bad when I would slightly mess up. If it was dishes, which was most common, they would yell at me and pull every dish out of the house, and I would have to wash every single one of them. It was about then that I found out how bad life had become. I decided to talk to my mom on the phone about it, and she reported it. Magically. After that, life was fun again. Apparently an investigation was launched, and my dad and stepmom had to play nice for a while. Then it got worse. The chores came back, but this is where the physical and mental abuse came in. When I would be walking past my dad, he would smack me or shove me. This was how it started. I tried calling my mom again, but they wouldn't let me. After I tried calling my mom again, the abuse got worse. As much as I hated this, the mental abuse was the worst. This went on for 4 years. Then, my stepmom's mom came in. I started visiting her a lot. I had actually forgotten there was more to life than beatings and being hated. She helped me to remember that life could be good. One day, I decided to tell her everything. I vented and cried with her for more than an hour, and she talked to the police and let me move in. It was wonderful, and I was finally happy again. This is when I found out about everything my dad had done behind my back. He lied to the police and said that my mom had abused me and got a restraining order on her. She didn't end up going to jail, thank God, because there wasn't enough evidence. This is why I wasn't allowed to talk to her for so long. Then Grandma went to work. She contacted the government, and I was allowed to speak to my mom again with supervised visits. At this point, it had been 5 years since I had seen her. The entire time she spent trying to get me back. She broke up with the bad guy she was with, and was with a new man who was great. Eventually, after a long fight, I moved back in with my mom and life went back to normal. After all this, I obviously began to hate my dad. Cue the provenge. I heard from a friend of mine that my dad had moved to North Dakota, we lived in Minnesota, and started doing heavy drugs. Shortly after that, my dad decided to call me, and he had the nerve to ask me for money. What the heck? I told him to get lost and blocked his number. I was fuming. Then I remembered him talking about how he had multiple warrants in different states and thought, maybe ND is one of them. I went online and searched the active warrants list of ND, and sure enough, he was there. I called the sheriff's department of the town he was living in and told them that there may be a man by the name of X that had a warrant for their arrest and was possibly in possession of drugs. They caught him and found a bottle filled with meth on him. He was charged with felony possession of a controlled substance, and I hope he rots in prison. Story 6. To preface a little, a few years ago, I was in the U.S. Army where I did 3 deployments overseas. While on mid-tour leave, you would fly in and out of the U.S. from a normal airport. You would walk in, go to your gate at the airport that's closest to you, fly to the airport in Atlanta, and then fly out from there with a few stops overseas, switching planes and all that until you eventually get back to Kuwait where the staging area was, and take a military flight to a base with an airstrip close to you, and then normally travel by helicopter to an even smaller base close to you and stay there until a convoy could come collect you. Unless you were one of the lucky people deployed to one of the nice, large, relatively comfortable bases. It was not uncommon that while coming home in Atlanta, people would be there to greet and cheer on returning soldiers as they exited the airport. I got to Adel a few hours early, so I had some time to kill. I decided to check it out and stand with those greeting those coming home on leave. Here I am in uniform, greeting returning soldiers with random people, some of which do this because they are what's known as Gold Star families, others because they are just patriotic or have a kid or brother serving. There are a number of groups who organize these things. Gold Star families. Gold Star families are families who had a direct relative like a son or daughter who died while serving. They generally get the utmost respect from soldiers and anyone around who even knows they are, though it's not like they generally flaunt it. Some will wear a little pin when attending these events. It has a gold border with a gold star in the middle and a purple background. Their car may also have a special license plate depending on the state stating this that they got from the vehicle registry. So I am standing there and shaking the hands of returning troops, and I notice that the lady next to me has a small girl and is welcoming the troops, and it looks like she is almost about to cry. I also happen to notice the gold star pin that's pinned to her jacket. The little girl also keeps looking up at me standing there as well. I can see her just out of the corner of my eye. One of the times I look down and smile at her. At this point in my life, I had no kids of my own or anything, but I have always liked kids. Since there was a lull in the crowd for the moment, I crouched down and asked her what her name was. Let's call her Lily. She had to be about 7 or so. She said she liked my patch. The patch she was referring to was the unit patch for the 101st Airborne. I had one on each side. If you're not familiar with a uniform, on the right shoulder is the flag, and if you have deployed, a unit patch under that, and on the left is your current unit patch. The combat patch may not always match the unit patch, even though mine did. The combat patch does not need to be worn all the time, though the unit patch does. This fact will come into play soon. Lily was really nice and cute. I started talking to her mother as well, and it turns out, her husband Lily's father was in the 101st as well and was killed in action about a year and a half before. I didn't know him, but I know the brigade she mentioned. I was deployed at the same time and heard about the incident he was involved in, but I didn't know any details regarding it. The division is pretty big and spread out when deployed after all. I don't remember the exact conversation, but it was mostly about her husband and all that. After a bit, it was getting time for me to get going. I pulled off my combat patch and handed it to Lily with a smile, saying something that I likely thought sounded inspirational or something at the time. She smiled from ear to ear and happily accepted it, knowing full well it came directly from a soldier in the same group as Daddy. I started to walk away after a wave, and I felt a tug at the back of my jacket. I turned thinking it was Lily. But it was actually another kid that is probably about 5 or so, give or take. "Give me," he tells me. "Excuse me?" Points to Patch. "Sorry, buddy, I don't have any more to give out." His mom then said, "Don't lie to my son. I see you have one right on your shoulder. You can give him that. I'm sure you have more somewhere." Saying it almost as if an entitled valley girl would say it. This triggers her entitled kid, and he starts throwing a huge tantrum. Apparently, he really didn't like not getting what he wanted immediately, or he was shown at an early age that crying and yelling would get him what he wanted. I would say what the kid was yelling, but I don't think anyone would have understood it when they heard it. It's like the kid became possessed and was speaking in tongues. I would not have been surprised to see pea soup vomit spewing out like the scene from The Exorcist at that point. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I cannot take this one off. It's—" She cut me off. "I don't see what the big deal is. I pay taxes, and that pays you, so you work for me anyway, and my taxes paid for that patch." "Ma'am, I also pay taxes." As a note here, this was just the first time I encountered one of those "I pay taxes and you get paid for by taxes, so you work for me" types of people. I had no idea people like this even existed, and this was far from the last time in my life I would have to deal with people like this either. "You work for me. How dare you deny a child this? What kind of soldier are you?" The rant continues, drawing a crowd. Inside, I'm shocked, but on the outside, I keep a calm and collected attitude. By this point, she had attracted a crowd. I didn't have the time or energy for this. I had to get to my gate and mentally had to deal with the fact that within a week, someone would likely be trying to kill me again. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but the answer is no. Now I have to go." I turn and start walking. Karen then grabs me from behind on the throat, hand around neck, so fingers grabbing onto my actual throat. I'm confident she meant to grab my shoulder, but had poor hand-eye coordination. Instinctively, I turn quickly and forcibly push her hand away with my forearm. The goal was not to hit or hurt her, but quickly remove her hand from my throat. Nothing more, nothing less. Luckily for both of us, her hand slipped right off, but not before leaving some fingernail scratches on my neck. You know those insurance fraud videos you see on YouTube where the person unconvincingly jumps in front of a stopped car as though they were hit, landing on the hood and rolling off? It was like that. She stumbled down and started with the most fake cry ever, yelling about how I threw her on the ground. I seriously don't have time for this. As soon as it happened, I backed away, hands raised a bit. I wanted it to be seen for sure, since she was yelling that I threw her on the ground, that I was no threat at this point. Karen then starts screaming, saying I broke her perfectly fine leg, and that she was going to sue me, and of course that phrase we all know and love. "Do you know who I am?" I didn't engage at all from that point on. An airport officer was already walking up and saw the entire thing. She looked at me and then the woman on the ground and sighed audibly. She called on her radio, and an EMT, emergency medical technicians, rolled up a minute later. I'm sure the officer knew Karen didn't need one, but I am assuming it's some form of protocol. The entire time she's asking me step by step what happened. I tell her all the details, the same as a couple bystanders and a few other soldiers around did, as well, confirming my side of the story. When done, I stand off to the side and wait. Being a smoker, and this before the days of e-cigs, I was getting antsy. I was hoping to stop at the smoking lounge before heading to the gate, which back then they had at Adel, though I have no idea if they do anymore, but no time for that at this point. 15 minutes and I would miss boarding. I was screwed. If you miss your flight for basically any reason, you're looking at in the least a demotion. I make a very quick call to my rear detachment, quickly fill them in on what has gone down and hang up. Sure, I am going to be screwed. EMS check her out, and she is totally fine. The officer asks if I want to press charges. At this point my neck is sore, but I have no idea I have even been scratched. I say something along the lines of, "No damage done, so no need," to which she pulls out a small makeup mirror and shows that I have some decent scratches on my neck and a little bit of blood on the collar of my uniform. I'm still not worried about it though. A couple days, and that will all be gone. I let her know that I don't intend to press charges or anything. After hearing the woman shrieking like a banshee constantly, the officer turns and yells for her to shut up. In an amazing authoritative tone, she directs the woman to leave the airport immediately, shutting her down every time the woman tries to argue back. The cop ends with, "You can either leave or you will be arrested, charged with assault." Even though I said no, Karen didn't know that, and banned from the airport. Luckily Karen gets the hint and leaves, dragging her poorly taught child with her. Her being arrested would have screwed me over big time in further delays, so I'm glad she just left. Now, nice as if nothing happened, the officer walks up and asks to see my ticket. Seeing I am about to miss my flight at this point, as this whole thing was a good 50-minute long ordeal, she makes a call for a minute on her radio and tells me to follow her. We go through a service door and through all these back hallways and even the luggage loading and sorting area, which if I had time would have been awesome to look over, as I kinda geek out about that kind of stuff. Don't judge me, and pop out a door right by my gate. The officer thanked me for my service, and I went to the gate. Turns out she called the security to hold the plane for me because I was told they were supposed to shut the gate 5 minutes ago upon walking up to the gate. If I had not gone through all the back ways and bypassed security too, I would have easily been 15 to 20 minutes late and missed the flight. I called the rear detachment before takeoff, and they logged it. My command in theater already knew the basics by the time I got back to base. My first sergeant was cool, so we joked about it for a bit, and that was the end of it. A week later I got called to my battalion commander's office. I am thinking I am screwed because it had to be about the incident. Turns out that the widow whose kid I gave my patch to was friends with his family. He was in that brigade when it happened. The guy had served under my commander to some degree in the same battalion. So we had a nice long chat about him, the deployment and life in a relaxed state. Nothing formal. No sirs, standing at attention or anything. Just two soldiers talking. It's a small world, it turns out. He showed me some pictures of them together and shared stories about some of the things they did. From mission planning, hiking back home, jokes and general fooling around, all soldiers of pretty much any rank due to pastime while deployed. Like dressing up as Santa on Christmas and digging through countless boxes of MRES, just to take the candy out and hand one to each of the lower enlisted. This was back in 23, so there were no stores on pretty much any of the bases, or apparently walking around wearing an adult diaper and a plastic toy bow in the command center on Valentine's Day. To sitting at the bar after the deployment with all the command unit soldiers and toasting their fallen brother.